Right, so we're going to get on with this game. Sorry, the video cut out last, so I'm now recording this. This is part 2 of this video, how to be lucky. So this is like how to be lucky. This is some advice, how do you become a lucky player? Now, what I've noticed about this game was that Daniel was very resilient. So White played the move rook e3. That was actually quite a big mistake. What he should have done was play the move rook f3. And that would have been a winning move, actually. So Black has obviously got his king. He's a little bit exposed. He hasn't managed to castle. Even if he manages to castle queenside, that will run into f takes e7. And the king will be very exposed on c8. So rook f3 would have been a winning move. Now the point is that if you play queen c4, which was a defense that Daniel played in the game, you now go queen c7. Very obvious threatening checkmate, right? Taking here isn't necessarily going to help you very much, because now all these nasty threats like rook e6 are going to lead to direct checkmate. I mean, I think a move like here is probably not going to hold, because I could, for example, simply play rook f7, threatening the mate. How do you prevent that? Very difficult. Probably can't prevent it. So Black could play knight e7 like in the game, but now we take on e6. And White is winning. I just take on d7. The computer says that White is winning the game. Black king is too exposed. Black does have some certain amount of counterplay with the c pawn, but that will quickly be snuffed out by something like rook takes e7. My guess is that at this point in the game, Boychik, or however you pronounce it, was quite short a time. So he probably made a gamble and he went rook e3. And now Daniel played absolutely the correct move. So I think this is another way you can be a lucky player. Or, what a term, lucky player, right? Is you're finding the lines to test the opponent. If your head is slumping when you get a bad position, then you are not going to be able to find the critical lines to test your opponent. I think this is a very important point. That your psychology, and I keep coming back to this, your outlook is very important when it comes to being a lucky player. Because if you're the type of player who gets annoyed when you get a bad position, you're not going to be a lucky player over time, because you're not then going to find the most testing lines to test your opponent. But I think Daniel has a very good temperament, very good outlook. And he wouldn't have been affected by the fact that he might have felt that his position was dangerous. He would have just tried to find the absolute best move. That's all you can do. You try to find the absolute best move. And sometimes it won't work out for him. The opponent will find the best line, but you're playing against other human beings. At some point they're going to go wrong. Now the point is that if you play me like queen c7, Black will go knight d7. So we talked about this line before. Rook takes e6. There's quite a big difference now. Now you don't take on f1 immediately, I think, because a rook takes e7 will happen with check. But you now can castle. And if I now take, we have queen f1. So this is a subtle difference that White clearly didn't see when he played rook e3. My guess was he was possibly in time trouble and wasn't able to find the best move. So going back to this position, yeah, there was another line there, which with rook f4 was also worthy of mention, but I don't think that is good enough. Black will go d4. There's some line like queen d3. Oh no, hang on. I think this happened in the game, actually. Yeah, Daniel played queen d3, sorry, yeah. So queen d3, and now he's threatening queen g3. So the point is, if you take there, I've got queen g3, and then I castle. So White tried queen c6. And then he just pushed. f7 was tried. Actually, that was a bad move, I think. I think there were other options. Although I can't actually remember what the other options were. I think f7 was a bad move. You could take on a8, but that runs into king f7, right? So you think, well, queen a8, king f7. Taking on e7. I can just take back, right? Or maybe even, yeah, I'll probably just take back. Because if that pawn queens, black's going to have 2 queens. That's going to effectively be the end of the game. 2 queens, queen on g3 is in a very dominant position. So what was the other move here? Yeah, white should have gone rook f1. Apparently that might have been enough for a draw. Tough move to find, especially when short of time. f7 feels like panic. You know, you throw in a check because you're short of time. You don't see anything else. Rook f1 was maybe, yeah, good enough to hold. White went f7 and rook f1. Now it's different though, because now I can simply play rook d8, or now black can simply play rook d8. Queen g5, another good move by Daniel, defending e7. Black just pushed the pawns. The knight c5 was very nice. Queen takes. And then, yeah, here they come. The armada, the avalanche is coming. Rook e5, pure desperation. I suspect there's more than one way for black to win here. It's also possible that queen d6 is good enough. I suspect queen d6 would also be winning. But black simply queen the pawn. You know, thank you very much. I'll just queen the pawn. If you take on c5, I guess even queen f1 is winning actually. Queen f1 would be end of the game, because queen f1, if you go to c7, I go queen f4 check, and when you bring the king back to the back rank, I then queen the other pawn, and then you've only got one move, queen e1, and then I take on e1 is checkmate. And after rook c5, queen c5 is also easily good enough to win the game. So white decided to give up the game. So that was a good example, I think, of tightrope defense, which I think you need to be a lucky player. You need to be able to keep pushing the attacking player to the point where you're forcing them to keep, you know, to give you an analogy, it's almost like in tennis when you're playing against people like Rafael Nadal or Djokovic, and they're able to get one more ball back. They keep getting the ball back, keep getting the ball back. You see that time and time again in these top matches, and they wear down the attacking player to the point where they get frustrated and they put the ball into the net. Let's move on to the final game. And this was a game that Daniel had against Brody in Kleinmont. Daniel plays as Caro-Kann. He plays the Caro-Kann a lot. So I believe this tournament took place in Australia. And Daniel played all over the world. He played in America, he played in Australia, played in Europe. He even played Serbian League, I think, or something like that. That's what you got to be. I mean, that's part of the reason I don't think my chess career stalled. Well, one thing is age. I've just got older. And I do think, actually, that in chess, age is very important. I know there are people who buck the trend to a certain degree, but that's not really the norm. And obviously you can look at people like Korchnoi and, you know, Keith Arkle, you keep, you know, hearing about, but his rating has also declined. He's an active player and he's fallen foul of deflation. My ratings declined as well. But yeah, somebody was saying on the something on the one of these threads that I created on the British Chess magazine. British Chess News, which is a thing on Facebook. And they were saying how, you know, you could take like a 50-year-old player. They didn't really agree with what I was saying, and they thought like a 50-year-old player could become a GM. And I'm like, well, come on, man. You know, like they say, like a 50-year-old player who's not got a title could become a GM. I just don't agree with that at all. I don't think that's possible. I think it's very difficult even for an IM player, level player, to become a GM once you've turned 50. Or even once you've turned 40. You know, I think we've seen Amit Gartsi do very well recently. He probably will become England's next GM. However, Amit was always a very strong IM and probably only didn't become a GM because of his work and various commitments. I think it's just very hard for somebody who doesn't have a title at all to become a GM. You know, even if they worked extremely hard. And the reason is, I do think chess to a certain degree is a sport. You couldn't get like a Premier League player. You couldn't get somebody who's maybe reasonably talented in football, train them up, and turn them into a Premier League footballer at the age of 50. It just wouldn't happen. And I think the same applies to chess. You just could not become a GM when you're 50. Daniel became GM a few years ago. He might even be one of the last few players in England to become a GM. I think the most recent one was Ravi Haria, who's slowed down in recent years. Anyway, that's enough babbling. Let's carry on with the game. So we see this variation, actually. Bishop f5, h4 is very popular. But in this game, white plays more position. He goes knight f3. That is one of the main lines. I believe you can also just simply castle here. That's another line. Maybe bishop e3 is also playable. c4 is sometimes played by white in these systems. But white plays knight. Yeah, knight e2. Interesting move by Daniel, a5. And I think that shows his approach to chess. A lot of time he's playing very offbeat lines. Now, a5, I looked it up. I suspect he prepared this before the game. I looked up a5 and there's only been 5 games played with that move. It's quite a well-known position. Normally black plays c5 here, I think. Or knight e7, which is the way that black develops. So often black will play knight e7, c5 and put that knight on c6. Keep the knight on d7. That's the way to get the king side out. Because otherwise, how do you develop the king side? I mean, if you go bishop e7 in these kind of systems, where would the knight go? The knight could go to h6, but a little bit of an awkward square for it. So generally, black will go c5, followed by knight e7, knight c6. However, Daniel played a5. What's the thinking behind a5? I think partly it's just to avoid any preparation by white, playing a slightly offbeat system, which seems to score reasonably well. However, one idea, I think, is also to threaten a4. And white often wants to play a4 himself in these kind of positions. And then possibly a5 to gain space on the queen's side. So black already stamping down on that. So a4 now, black could play c5, but I think you'd be reluctant to play c5 having played a5 because you're then giving up the b5 square. However, computers think that even a move like c5 is reasonably acceptable. Black played f6. Knight b3. Knight h6, decent move. Yeah, I think it was also possible, instead of knight h6, maybe something like queen c7 was possible. Or taking on e5. But taking on e5 will run into this, and then white will very quickly go knight d4. One of the ideas to hit this structure. So black played knight h6. Yeah, I think Daniel made a bit of a... It's already a tricky position to play, and I think he should have gone bishop g6 here. Although white is better, it's manageable advantage. Instead he played this. Bishop h5 was played. So white so far has played an excellent game. However, if we look at the position, one thing really stands out, which is that white has a temporary advantage. Okay, so in the game he castled. So white has a temporary advantage. In the sense that the black king is in the open. However, black has a long-term advantage, I think. His structure is very good. He's got attacking chances down the g-file. He's got control over the dark squares. So Daniel's traded a short-term advantage, maybe short-term worse position for a long-term advantage. Knight e5 is very well placed, but can also be a focus of attack. So this is where white castled, but that actually was quite a bad move. Looks like a very natural move because you think the black king's in the centre. I want to get that rook into the game, attack the knight. Now, this guy is 24, 14. I believe he's quite a young player, right? I am trying to become a GM. Probably quite a talented player. But he should have played in this position to move queen e2, which also looks very natural. Boris Spassky said that the queen belongs on e2. And it's also a good move here because it just attacks the knight. So you're threatening queen e5. I often play these moves. I think, what would you play if you assume your opponent was a complete patzer? You play queen e2, wouldn't you? Because you're attacking the knight and you hope that they're not going to defend the knight, right? Or they're going to defend it badly with a move like bishop g7, which will run into f4. So clearly White must have seen that move. He must have considered queen e2, and he must have dismissed it because he thought, well, king d6, right? King d6, king is running away to safety, the knight will move. But then you castle queenside. Very important distinction over the game. In the game, the white king was a little bit vulnerable on the king side. But now, after castle's queen side, I've now got all these nasty threats like c4, which actually are quite difficult to deal with for black. You can't play king c7 yet. You'd like to play king c7, get the king out of the firing line, but that will run c4. The computer says that white is doing very, very well here. So let's try and defend the position. So I could play a bit like queen h4 maybe, right? Which looks natural. I mean, queen g5 was another option. Queen h4. I mean, maybe white did even get this far in his calculations, but clearly misassessed it. Often that's the reason you back off lines, is you not necessarily because the calculation's bad, but the resulting positions you just misassess. You might get this far and you might think, well, actually that looks like a good move. That's an annoying move. I don't like my king on c1. I feel like my queen side's vulnerable. He's going to take on a4. He's going to gollop my pawn. If I go rook e1, he'll just go bishop g7. Knight d4, so what? He'll just go queen e4 or something. I've got a bad position. I'd rather resign and play this rubbish, right? However, there's obviously a good move here for white. I'm not sure what it is, but because I did analyse the position before, and it said not this specific position on queen e4, but a position after castles, and the computer was saying white was a lot better. So let's think about his position. What could white play here? Well, g3 will run into queen e4. That's annoying. Knight d4 will run into queen e4. However, I'm not totally convinced about this knight d4, queen e4 defense. It feels slightly rickety, but maybe there's a move like queen d2 then. Or even rook e1, it might be an option. Let's just see what the computer says, because I'm obviously incapable of analysing this myself. Yeah, it gives rook e1, not knight e4 originally, right, because of queen e4, although that's also better for white. But it gives rook e1, bishop g7, then knight d4, and white's a lot better. And if you go knight d7, I go bishop e8, and white's a lot better. However, this, even though white would have been a lot better after queen e2, it's still by far from the end of the game. I'm sure Daniel would have made it very tricky for his opponent. He probably would have played a move like queen h4 is my guess, because it's kind of in his style, very active player. But instead of queen e2, Daniel's opponent Brody castled. King d7 was played. Knight d4, also a mistake apparently. I'm not sure what White should have played here. I mean, I'm looking at moves like f4 here as possibly a move, but maybe f4 will just run into knight c4. I mean, knight d4 looks very natural. Maybe White should have played queen e2 anyway. Also bad. So I'm not sure if I've analysed this position very well. Rook e1 is screaming at me. Again, we might have to cheat here. What is the engine saying? It does give rook e1, right? So it gives the line rook e1, bishop g7, and rook c1. Oh my god, that's amazing. Rook c1, what the hell? Who the hell would find this? Rook c1, that's just so kind of computer-esque. So I think one of the problems is if you go knight king c7, then knight d4, and I'm kind of teeing up a knight e6, right? And if you go knight c4, I mean, you might look at this and you might think, well, hang on a minute. What happens if you go knight c4, right? I can't then play c4. But then maybe you go knight c5. Yeah, knight c5 would obviously be annoying because knight c5. I mean, it's still king c8, but yeah, it just looks scary to allow knight c5. So I think here I've got this move. And it's even saying just go to c3. Yeah, computers are so strong in tactical positions. If you can play anything like a computer in a tactical position, you're obviously going to be a very, very strong chess player, right? That's what a lot of these kids aspire to. Let's just see how the game ended anyway. White played knight d4, and that was a mistake. Queen g5 was a very good move. I think here Daniel should have just slid his king across. King c7, and black was doing very well indeed. It's funny how the game transformed. So he's suddenly got his knight on g3, which is not really doing much in attacking sense. And black is ready to bring the rook across. Pressure down the f-file. But instead he played a little bit of a careless move, actually. Played rook f8. That was quite a bad move because now white had quite a good tactical move. He went knight e4. That was an excellent move. So he's shown why he's a good player. He's found knight e4. And he took. Queen e2 again, decent move. So I think around about this point it was close to being equal. Maybe white even had a tiny edge out here actually. Although the game soon kind of became very equal. And f4 again, reasonable move. Maybe h3 not the best, but not terrible. I wouldn't criticise any of these moves. It was only here that white went very seriously wrong. So he's got back in the game, and I think he could have played him with like bishop g4, and he probably would have had a very good chance of making the draw, I think. But obviously when you're playing someone who's higher rated than you, he's a GM, he's a good player, Daniel would have kept pressing, he would have kept trying to find ideas. But instead, white played g4, overlooking this move, knight d5, which is really like a killer blow, knight d5, because suddenly f4 is extremely weak. And the game finished like this. Knight f4, very nice move. And in fact, white decided to resign the game, decided it's just no reason to carry on. If you move the bishop, well, clearly I'm threatening to take on c4. If you move the bishop, I can take here, and now this something like this is completely winning for black, I think, because I just got this outside pass pawn. It's something I could even just play me like king d4 probably, or knight g5 is very, very natural. Probably a better move actually than king d4. And now I'm ready to push the pawn. And white has no counterplay. If you can't use your king in an active sense because you're going to be tied out to this h pawn, it will just give black all the time he wants to attack the queen side. So understandable resignation by white. So Daniel won that game. His rating crept up, making O'Malley even more jealous. But yeah, no, this is the future. I think someone like Daniel has a good chance of. I'm not sure about getting 2600 because that is a big jump, especially now these days with the deflation. But he's certainly got a chance to keep improving his rating. I do think FIDE are rectifying the deflation thing, so we might see things turn around a little bit rating wise. But he's done very well anyway to get where he has, to gain 60 points in a period where most players have been losing. Most active players have been losing. And I think he hasn't been. I think his efforts have not been recognised enough, I would say, by those in power in English chess. And, there is a sense where you kind of feel like neglected and ignored. Whereas others are getting like everything. You're getting nothing. you know, and that can be frustrating. But yeah, so that's my advice on how to be a lucky player. You've got to play risky chess. You've got to go for it. That's the number one thing. You've got to have a very kind of even temperament if things go wrong. You've got to keep calculating. Don't get frustrated. This is all good advice, and therefore we become a lucky player. There's a very famous saying in chess, the winner is always lucky. So there's all these famous sayings about luck. And there's also a very famous saying from golf, which is attributed to Gary Player, who's a famous South African player. But in fact, I remember watching an interview with him, and he said he heard it from somebody else. But the famous saying is, the more I practice, the luckier I get. So yeah, to be a lucky player is essentially to be a good player. But one who's also taking risks, who's not willing to take soft draws, who isn't too obsessed about opening theory, and is not bothered when they get a bad position. So all these attributes will turn you into a lucky player. So if you feel at the moment that you're an unlucky player, and there's a lot of us around, we could have like a self-help group for unlucky players. These are the things you need to do to become a lucky player. And one of the most important things is don't take soft draws. Keep fighting every game, and then you will start to gain the luck. Yeah, so that was my video on how to be a lucky player. Please like and subscribe to the video. Please subscribe to the channel. Please like the video, and so on. And I'm going to try and get up to 1,000 subscribers, but it probably won't happen anytime soon. At the moment I'm only on about 130, but you know, we can try. Thank you.